NAFI would like to thank Sporties and AOPA for their generous sponsorship of this episode of the More Right Rudder podcast. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the More Right Rudder podcast from the National Association of Flight Instructors. My name is Sarah Staudt. I'm the Program Development Manager here at NAFI. Joining me today is Anthony Sypula, who is the Chief Flight Instructor of a large Part 61 flying club based out of Centennial, Colorado. He oversees the flight operations and management of over 75 instructors, 900 member pilots, and a large fleet of Cessna and Piper aircraft. He's given over 2,000 hours of flight instruction, is a fast team representative, and NAFI Master Instructor. Welcome, Anthony.
Hey, Sarah, thanks for having me.
Thanks. I'm glad you were able to come on the show. You emailed NAFI with an interesting topic that's very relevant in today's flight instruction environment, and that's maintaining CFI professionalism and readiness during industry slowdowns.
Sure, yeah.
So you developed this presentation as a local thing, correct? For as part of your fast team rep duties?
Yep, so I developed it initially to present and sort of test the presentation out on my instructor group at our monthly meetings, and then sent it to my local fast team manager as well. He really liked it, and that's what kind of brought me to looking at you guys' content at NAFI, to the potential to upload it for other people to find some value in it.
Yeah, I think this is great, and we'll make the content, the presentation available. So check the show notes of this podcast. And I felt this was really relevant. I see on social media all the time that people are looking for jobs, they're at their minimums and are looking for the next thing. And it's a be patient economy
Yes.
for a lot of people.
Yep.
So that doesn't mean that there's nothing to do, or that you should just sit back on your laurels and wait for the email or phone call from your application because you've hit your magic number of hours. There's still some things you should be doing, or could at least be thinking about doing. Anthony, walk us through the information that you have about the current hiring landscape.
Sure. So we had just such a boom. It really was a boom of hiring over the past couple of years, with people. It seemed like not a day after reaching that magical 1,500 hour number that people were just immediately class dates, ATP, CTP, onto class, and doc training from there, starting at the regional level, CFIs moving into there, and then the bigger legacy carriers really starting to hire quickly from those regional carriers. So we saw this huge wave of hiring happened, and then as that wave of hiring at the airline level is happening, it's bringing in a lot of new student pilots that are looking to eventually fly professionally themselves. And so as of late, it seems that, a lot of people are calling it a slowdown of hiring. I think when you compare a couple of years ago to the current hiring market, I would more call it a return to normal than a slowdown. So it kind of depends on what you're comparing it to. But I think I would call what's going on the hiring level now much more of a normal than a slowdown.
I've seen that discussion point too online, that for the people who were able to kind of catch that wave, so to speak, that's kind of all they knew. And so when things slowed down, they're like, wow, man, this is really dragging now. And it's not, from the historical data, that I've seen people put out, it is a normalization.
Sure. Yep.
So, but it definitely feels slow compared to our recent experience. So that does leave people kind of having to wait for their turn and keep themselves busy and most importantly, professional along the way. Let's talk about the impacts to flight instructors during this slowdown and kind of mentally what they may be experiencing during their time kind of sitting there waiting.
Yeah. So part of the balance and the first kind of half of this presentation is really addressing those CFIs who are currently still instructing, many doing it, on a full-time basis, They're either very close to reaching those minimums to move on, or they've reached them and they're simply sitting around waiting on a class date, maybe even waiting just to interview with a regional carrier. And so the balance then becomes still always prioritizing your students first and foremost, and thinking about some of the factors that from both a safety and a professionalism element that some of these higher time CFIs could potentially be at risk for. A couple of the examples that I gave here is they kind of both start the same. We've got high time CFIs, boredom and or complacency starts to set in at that kind of lack of trajectory, this slowdown, if you will. And there's two things really to address here. It's the training first and foremost. Those CFIs, maybe that apathy is set in a little bit, and it's starting to affect how well their flight instruction is going, both on the ground and in the airplane. And then that's translating into those students having poor results on whether it be on stage checks or inevitable check rides. And then the other element here is the safety part. Higher time CFIs, they've got all this experience. The complacency sets in. A day of less than optimal weather, they decide they want to go out. Maybe don't check all the boxes, dot all the I's, cross all the T's that they would do normally, and decide to go out on a flight. And now that risk factor is even higher for a potential incident or, in a worst case, an accident.
Both things you don't want to have to be explaining in an interview,
Yes.
um, especially recent ones.
Yep.
And and then also, just complacency, in flight as well. Kind of getting bored, not paying as much attention to your student. Things like that can all come in. So we have these flight instructors in this boat. They want to be somewhere else. That's not lost on us, and so they're waiting their turn. Let's talk about what techniques and what things they should be doing to maintain their professionalism as a flight instructor. Starting right off the bat here with don't let the industry get you down. We all know that this is a cyclical industry. That is not a surprise.
Yeah, and that's the part is you've signed up for this industry that, as you just mentioned, Sarah, is cyclical. It's volatile. It's unpredictable. You got to kind of roll with the punches a little bit, if you will. And so don't let that. I mentioned earlier career trajectory, if you will. Don't let a perceived lack of trajectory affect you in your current job, which is as a flight instructor. It's not flying a regional jet. It's not flying a Pilatus. It's not teaching, if you will. Right now, your vessel you've chosen to get to that next step is as a flight instructor, as you mentioned, totally fine. If flight schools only hired career CFIs, it'd be let's put it bluntly, it'd be hard to keep the doors open. And so if this is the vessel you've chosen to get to the next step in your career, then that step has to be approached with seriousness, professionalism, and prioritizing your students logbooks over your own. And so everything from your appearance and attitude, they always say just dress for the job you want, not the job you have. Really stay positive and composed with your students. FOIs talk about apathy to inadequate instruction. They'll pick up on that. Older learners, younger learners, they're going to pick up on that. And what you have to remember is you're potentially that first student's exposure to aviation. And aviation is fun. It's great. It's, in this case, for the CFI, it's a stepping stone to the next part of their career. But you being upset, if you will, about that lack of progression, the time and place for that is not to be talked about with your students. And that kind of rolls into being consistent in the instruction you're given, avoiding that complacency or just sheer boredom. Be on time to your lessons. And then most importantly, to kind of summarize that, is to just set a good example for, again, you're their first vision of a professional pilot. And you are, as a flight instructor who's being paid to do that, you are a professional pilot.
Mm-hmm.
So keep it professional with your students, your coworkers, the management staff at whatever club or school that you're instructing in, and really keep those students informed with their training progression. Maybe this is the 11th student pilot you've started from zero. Your approach to them should be the same as it was with the rest. Sure, now we've got we've got new tools in the toolbox to approach that training. Maybe a year ago you had a couple ways to teach a steep turn. Now you got 4 or 5 different ways. So sure, we're going to apply those tools to this new student, but we want to still keep them informed and aligned with where they're at in their training progression overall.
Yeah, that law of primacy is strong, even with
Yes.
behaviors. Professional behaviors. It's not just, oh, forgot to mention that you need to use this flight control or that input or hold the checklist for this. It's not just that technical operational stuff. It is your professional behaviors in that, and you're their first role model. And even if you are working with someone who, maybe they're moving on to instrument or a higher level thing. Now they've got some experience, and they'll apply what happened with their last experience to you. And hopefully they had a great first instructor. And if you're a little apathetic, you might not have a customer for long.
Yep. Absolutely. Well said.
And along with, those behavioral standards that we need to maintain, maintaining instructional standards is just as important because you don't want that apathy to sneak in, and now your students are a little bit sloppier than your ones were maybe 6, 8, 10 months ago. Because you're, you're like, I was looking out the window, the needle wiggled a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. And, part of the providing value in every lesson, ground or flight, is just that kind of what you mentioned. You may know, especially as it comes with experience of being a higher time CFI, of, yeah, this student, Johnny here, he is absolutely where he should be, in my opinion, on his pre-solo phase of his training. But don't let you knowing where they're at in training potentially not allow them to be still on board with it, if that makes sense. Um, be diligent in that documentation, your note taking. All of that shouldn't change. You're going to still be sharing that with your students because while you may think they're exactly where they need to be, they still need to know that, number one, and number two, then know what's coming up next in their training journey, if you will. The old compliment sandwich to be included in the debrief and in the notes, along with any homework you're assigning.
Yeah, that can be a tough one to continue to communicate and remember to communicate because as we've seen it all, it kind of becomes baked in, and we forget that as we've learned behaviors from students. Because for me as an instructor, I've had people say like, wow, you really take first time people and put them in an airplane and let them fly a little bit, and I'm like, they pretty much all behave the same way
Yep.
when you put them
Yep.
in an airplane. But the student doesn't know that that, like, right? Just like you can't read their mind, thinking back to when you were a new flight instructor, learning to pick up on those behavior cues from people. They don't have that experience with you. Plus, they're busy trying to learn, so they're not going to pick up on your behavior cues that, oh, this means that. Like, you really have to put the intention and the energy into communicating all that, even if it feels like you're in broken record mode. And I've said this 5 times today. You've probably said it to 5 different people, and that one can't
Exactly.
read your mind any better than you can read theirs.
Yep. Well said. Exactly.
Here's an interesting statistic that you've pointed out here, with our first time pass rate. So walk us through some of this pass rate data.
Pulled this from a presentation that Jason Blair gave on a NAFI Mentor Live a couple of years ago, where he was talking about these pass rates for private, commercial, and then that CFI initial, um, have all shown declines in the first attempt pass rates. And so obviously the question is why? Let's get a conversation going as to what we maybe think is going on. And I personally think a lot of that can be attributed to that big hiring wave we talked about at the beginning of the program here. And, suddenly a lot of higher timed experienced CFIs were immediately taken. They're moving on to the next step in their career. And those that are coming to fill those slots are newer CFIs. They have less of that experience. And I think especially, I'm a little impartial to CFI initial training. I do a lot of that myself. Those who are conducting it, that CFI initial training, don't have the experience level of those that had done it previously. Um, we know about the regulation changes with who can conduct CFI initial training now, um, making the window a little bit wider, if you will, of who can actually conduct initial CFI training. Um, and I think that's a pretty noticeable correlation as to why we're seeing those pass rates um, decline a little bit.
Yeah, that's my interpretation of this too. It's like you said, all of those CFIs who had been waiting, through 2019, 2020, 2021, got sucked up. They're starting in 2021, moving off to airlines, but even just not the high time guys, pretty much anybody, as soon as they hit their magic number, they were gone.
Yep.
And so it really did create a vacuum. And I heard of schools even having a hard time finding instructors who were qualified and experienced enough to teach initial CFIs. So some of that even, I don't want to say stagnated, but even getting new CFIs certificated was a challenge for a period there.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
So I would, yeah, I would interpret this the same way that that's just a lot of, we're rebuilding the experience base, essentially, with getting those flight instructors out there, whether they like it or not at this point, but having that extra experience and knowledge to pass down to your applicants, even at the private pilot level, is an overall boost to the industry, even if you'd rather be flying something bigger at the moment.
Sure. Yeah. And something I also think about with this too, with specifically to the private pilot check rides is I'm sure I'm not alone in this, but oftentimes what we get is higher time, more experienced CFIs. They naturally progress into doing more instrument, more commercial, or maybe
Sure.
even doing CFI initials, double I's, MEIs. So a space is left over for brand new student pilots. Um, if I had it my way, I would kind of love the trend to be kind of flipped the way it is now, which is currently new student pilot comes in, wants to start on their private pilot rating. They end up uh, getting paired with a brand new or relatively new kind of green CFI because all the more experienced ones are in the more advanced training phases.
Hmm.
And I think it would just be really, there could be a lot of value both from a progression standpoint, obviously, check ride pass rates standpoint as well, of getting some of those higher time, more experienced CFIs to still be taking on brand new student pilots.
Yeah, and that would be I agree with the overall philosophy. It'd be interesting to see how it would get implemented. I've definitely see, flight schools and different flight training establishments that pay a higher rate to their flight instructors for some of that advanced training.
Absolutely,
And the flight
we're the same
instructors
way.
like the variety, I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, if someone said I had the choice between, "Oh, go do these 3 IPCs or these private pilots," like, I'm picking the IPCs personally.
Yes,
So,
and where I'm at
it
now,
is
I'd
it
be
is a
right there
big
with you.
paradigm shift, even if it would overall, and I know, of course, like, if your school's overwhelmed with private pilot applicants, that's what you gotta take, that's your customer base. But yeah, that would be a difficult paradigm to shift,
Hmm.
especially when you're talking about you get pay rates and things, complicated matters in there. But overall, I like the philosophy. All right. Now, here's kind of our critical juncture in this discussion. So, we've talked about our slowdowns, but how else can we turn these slowdowns into growth opportunities? Because now, when your number does come up, you're going to have to differentiate yourself from a whole bunch of other candidates who've been doing the exact same thing you've been doing.
Yep.
And so why should someone in a hiring position pick you? And these growth opportunities are good ways to differentiate yourself.
Yeah, sure. So we kind of talked about it earlier with talking about the kind of boredom and complacency. The word here is monotony as well. Is well, what can I do? Nobody's going anywhere in a hurry. So what can I do in the meantime to not only kind of to break up that monotony, but also, as you mentioned, Sarah, to help develop my resume, my experience, background to set me ahead of some candidates in an otherwise big, thick stack of resumes. And there's a personal and professional development element of this, leadership and mentorship in the aviation community at your particular um, flight club or flight school that you're instructing at. And all of these things are what's going to tie into helping that resume stick out, but then also some of the quality over quantity of time actually in your logbook.
Yeah, so finding a variety of things to do. I was lucky when I was training at a Part 61 school. Flight instruction was my primary thing, but they also did city tours, and we still did those in 172s. But they were fun to do. We had the 25-mile nautical mile air tour letter of authorization, so
Mhm.
those provided some variety. I got into aerial photography and all that. So those are all still hours and they add to the variety. Let's talk about some of the other ways you can kind of break up the monotony and boost your candidacy while you're at it.
Sure. So first sticking point here is the additional ratings. There's value. There's a couple different ways to look at the value in getting your double I, your CFII, or your MEI. As you mentioned earlier, we here at my school and I'm sure elsewhere, there is a higher pay rate for doing more specialized training. So that's a reason in itself to get your double I to do instrument instruction. That's a reason to get your MEI to do commercial multi. I think it's easy for a lot of people. They get stuck, or not stuck, but they get in this constant just training mindset, and it's all about meeting those minimums for a future airline job. So, does an airline job require you to have your double I? No. Does it require you to have your MEI? No. Uh, 25 hours of multi time? Great. I can do that as my commercial multi rating, do a little time building. And CFII is not required. So it's something that's easy for people to kind of look beyond and look past as they kind of have those blinders on of just getting to that end goal. However, I would counter it with, being able to teach instrument instruction as a CFII. Those that want to really do this professionally on a 121 or a 135 operation, that's your whole future career. Beautiful blue sky day like this, cleared for the visual. They're backing that up with an instrument approach.
Mhm.
So, just from a readiness standpoint of that next job you're going to get, there can be huge value in having your CFII and doing instrument instruction because it keeps you really sharp and on top of your instrument knowledge.
Yeah, you'll stay current and proficient. And that double I alone will open up a lot more doors. I don't know that I ever flew with an aircraft owner because they wanted me as a CFI. They wanted me as a double
Yep.
I. So I got
Yep.
more experience in makes and models and avionics suites because I had that double I, which made me more attractive to individual aircraft owners.
Sure. Absolutely. And to speak a little bit to the MEI rating, the other one listed here. So with kind of the slowdown that's been happening on at least the 121 level, a lot of CFIs are pursuing um, 135 operations. I mentioned earlier 25 hours is seems to be the multi number for regional job, for example. But a lot of these 135 operations, you're going to want significantly more multi-engine time beyond just that 25. That's simple enough to get as you're working on your commercial multi add-on. uh, so becoming an MEI is going to give you an opportunity to build more of that multi-time, which again, back to, resume and logbook building, if you will, to set you above other applicants who may be applying for that same job.
And MEI is not a tough add-on,
No.
especially if you are single engine proficient and instrument proficient. It's really a pretty easy add-on. I mean, I get it's expensive. There's no two ways around that. But it is a great add-on to get. It was when I did it. Oh gosh, I mean, it was years after I did my single engine CFI and double I. I thought it was. I don't want to say easy, but because I also had a lot of experience from being a CFI and a double I and all those check rides, but comparatively easy to other practical tests I had taken.
Yep. Absolutely. And the other part to think about with this is newer CFIs. They want to roll. They're quick to want to just get after it and start really exercising this certificate, being paid to fly and being a flight instructor. Um, I was a little late to the show myself, getting my CFII, for example. I had been a full time instructor for a little over a year. So when it was time to really start diving into instrument stuff to get ready for that certificate, for that rating, uh, the old saying, if you don't use it, you lose it, that's a thing. So, whether you are trying to build up your resume to get your first instructional job, or maybe you get that job and the student signups are a little bit slow, for example, and you haven't really built a full roster of students, that's a great opportunity to start getting these add-ons, because it's going to set you up professionally, resume, logbook wise. But then now you're also ready um, to take new, more advanced students as you get that first instructing job, or um, your school starts to really pick up in their new student training signups.
Hmm. Yeah, and some of the other things you have mentioned here, that high performance, complex, all those are great. And then anything else that just makes you look a little bit different. Okay, you did some aerobatics or some tail wheel. Those are all different skill sets that you bring to an operator as a pilot that you don't get if you don't do your tail wheel training, or just the energy management that comes along with learning aerobatics and things like that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't wanna say you should go do all these things, because the thing that keeps rolling around is my mind is recognizing that all of these have a cost, and we're talking
Yes.
about doing all of this in the context of, "Hey, hiring is slow, so go do these other things." So, that's not lost on us that some of these do have a cost. There may be ways, like I got my high performance endorsement through my local Civil Air Patrol squadron. So, participating in community things like that, particularly aviation based ones, can also be a good way to set yourselves apart and maybe get yourself into some of those unique operations or opportunities into flying different aircraft and, that high performance endorsement. Because, for the average, you know, ab initio pilot who shows up and says, I want to be a professional pilot, and they show up, all excited with their little kit and their logbook, you can go all the way up through MEI and never fly a high performance aircraft.
Yep.
You can do it, never flying it. Well, you get your complex with your multi. But if you don't, aside from that, you could go all the way through and not do a complex anymore. So going out and finding, those opportunities for high performance work or anything swinging gear is probably valuable time too.
Yeah, absolutely, and that goes back to the, quality over quantity of time in that logbook that's gonna set you apart from a lot of other people that may have the same amount of total time as you, but you've got these certificates and or background, broad, different types of aircraft flown, training offered, endorsements, etcetera, that's potentially gonna set you apart in amongst a sea of, resumes that kinda all look similar.
Yeah, especially when you're trying to condense them down to that one page.
Yep.
You've got to find a way to make yourself look different than a whole bunch of other people pursuing the same goal in a very small amount of space.
Yep, and, real quick, just because you mentioned it, attending and participating in aviation seminars, we talk about, obviously, there's an inherent cost to a lot of these other certificates or training avenues you're gonna go down, but participating in some of those aviation seminars or just events, it's a way to network. Networking,
Mhm.
I don't have to tell you, but networking, it's real. It's a real thing, and so putting yourself out there for that is an opportunity to get you a chance to, fly a tailwheel aircraft, fly a higher performance aircraft, mountain flying, aerobatics, that kind of thing. Connections can be made by participating in that.
Yeah, and a great way to do that, think about like your local chapters, whether it's EAA, Women in Aviation, the 99s, maybe like a local Friends of the Airport Club, your Civil Air Patrol squadrons. Or the one thing we have here is your FAST team rep.
Yep.
I'm a FAST team rep. I do the annual training with our FISDO. It's great. There's probably like 40 of us or so, that 40 to 50 that come, and it's everything from your average flight instructor up to the guy who commands the state police helicopter group. It is, and someone else who's doing the drone pro stuff are all there too, and the entire swath in between. So things like that are really great ways to make those connections. And even if you're still bound by insurance requirements and things like that, your name's known to them, and so when you do make those numbers, 'cause we're also can't get away from the fact that a lot of this is numbers based, for experience in that, knowing people will help a whole lot.
Yeah, and just the final box down there talks about more flight reviews, IPCs, or just proficiency flights with other pilots. Um, our flight club, for example, we do a lot of majority of what goes on here is flight training, but we've got hundreds of renter pilots. A lot of them already have a job flying an Airbus for United, or flying a Pilatus for a 135 operation. And so, whether it's just doing that Pilatus's pilot's checkout in a 172 because he still likes flying small airplanes, it is inherently a fun thing, to conducting an IPC. For member pilots, they may already be flying professionally, or they may know folks who are, and those kind of connections potentially gets you in. I've seen it happen here where
Mhm.
entire careers are made or quickly accelerated just by a happen chance meeting on a club annual flight review, or just getting coffee at our coffee machine out in the pilot lounge.
Yeah, those are all great ways. And the other thing I was thinking here with this and going back to getting that double eye, those aircraft owners are probably going to know other aircraft owners. They're just buddies down the hangar row and things like that, and that can bring around opportunities as well to get into those different makes and models and differentiate yourself. All right, cool. Well, let's move on here. A lot of these operators are also looking for these kind of leadership and mentorship type qualities. Those are big deal in these 121 and 135 environments. So let's talk about opportunities that flight instructors have now to gain some experience and skill with those particular aspects.
Sure. Yeah. So, mentor those new instructors, or, if you happen to be at a school with a lot of high time CFIs that maybe don't need the mentorship, so to speak, mentor those student pilots, offer advice. They're eh, Especially at the flying clubs like I work at, we have a lot of students that just love the environment being around here. So they have their own study groups, or they're just sitting in our big classroom studying themselves. Strike up a conversation with them, ask them about how their training's going, become a mentor to them. And in terms of the school or the club you're already employed at, find those opportunities via your own experience to become a stage check instructor or a lead instructor, however that job is described at your club or flight school. But ultimately, what both of that comes down to is just leading by example and accurate and professional records. We talked about this a little bit earlier, so I won't beat the dead horse. But just because this is your 10th private student, and you know exactly what they need and where they're at, it doesn't mean that they are on that same page that you are. Or don't kind of fall down to just knowing what that legal minimum that's required in terms of um, records for you to keep, and just kind of leave it at that, because that's going to lead to a poor training environment, number one, and potentially poor training outcomes, whether that's your stage checks or your check rides for those pilots.
Right. And also, so we're talking here in the context of a slowdown. And the flight instructor is like, your goal is to like not be there. You want to move on to the next thing. So, imagine you get that phone call tomorrow and they say, hey, okay, your class date's next week, which I understand those numbers aren't realistic right now. But
Sure.
for the sake of example and discussion here, now another CFI is going to have to pick up that record. And if you've like just ticked a couple boxes and scribbled a note at the bottom, I how are they gonna translate that into a good understanding of where that applicant is in their training? They may not be able to do that, or they may misunderstand what that is, to a greater degree, and all transitions are a bit disruptive. There's kinda no 2 ways around that, but it can be made less so, with good documentation, and then that way that student hopefully won't have to go back and demonstrate too much to the new instructor to really parse out where they are.
Yep. And that in that scenario, that demonstration, that Hobbs' ticket, it costs money. I mean, everyone knows it. It's no secret. Flight training is enormously expensive. So, to your point, Sarah, what are some things we can do to make that transition as efficient as possible and keep that training progressing and on task? It's exactly that, maintaining those accurate and professional records. So the guy taking over, or even the instructor, you're out sick, you're on vacation
Mhm.
for a week, and you got an instructor filling in with your students. You should expect the same kind of debrief and the same kind of notes from them. So that way, when you're back from this vacation, you're back from being sick, whatever it may be, that training just keeps on.
Good reasons all around for that. And let's jump into just a few tips. I'm seeing a lot of flight instructors on social media now saying, "Hey, I got my CFI. I've been applying, but I'm just not getting anywhere."
Yeah,
So, what are some tips we can offer these CFIs looking for their first instructing job?
sure. It's I can't speak for all other chiefs out there, but I certainly think most would probably agree that um, I want to hire new blood. I love bringing in and hiring new CFIs and giving them that first step on an eventual multiple steps progression to their future job. But the fact of the matter is, with the current groups of instructors not moving on as quickly as possible, it's just tougher to bring it to interview and hire new
Mhm.
CFIs. So what can you do in the meantime? Well, tips for how your resume is constructed. Mentioned it earlier. One page is best. What are some things that chiefs are looking for on those resumes? We mentioned it earlier. Experience level in airplanes you've flown, for example. Just because you've given 0 hours of dual doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to get a job. But two people, one with 0 hours of dual, one with also 0 hours of dual given, but flown a lot of different airplanes. That can make a huge difference in who that employer is going to select. And so part of that is knowing that potential employer. How big is their fleet? What is the makeup of the fleet? Get in there and talk to, go for a tour. Talk to people that are training there. Talk to the front desk dispatch staff. Talk to the 3 or 4 CFIs that are probably sitting on the couch in the pilot lounge in between lessons, about feeling them out about what it's like to actually work there, because that question's probably going to come up in some form or fashion on when you actually do get that interview. Something as generic as, "So, what do you know about this school?" So knowing your potential employer is going to help better tailor that resume for that potential employer. And then CFI interview prep and some tips for successful CFI interview when you do get it. Always tell people on an interview, "Hey, this is not a CFI check ride. You've passed a check ride. This is an interview to be an instructor at this school." So I'm really looking to evaluate what you're going to be like with actual students. Um, I've gotten very good at pretending to be a student in those ground lessons you're presenting to me. The questions come from questions I had when I was a student pilot to questions that my students have asked me in the past. So really practice teaching and presenting those lessons. I always recommend friends, family, whoever it may be, people with no aviation background whatsoever are great to teach those technical subject areas. Those that do CFI initial training, sure, we're pretending to be students, but you can't make up the questions that those without the aviation background are going to ask. Try teaching why an airplane flies to someone who knows nothing about airplanes. I guarantee they've got some questions that I could never even think of. And so there's 2 points to this is, number one, having those questions is going to illuminate any deficient knowledge areas that you may have, thus knowing what you need to study up on. But it's also practice for what that interview is going to probably be, which is really that interviewer taking the role as a student pilot or a pilot in training, and asking non-standard questions, if you will. Um, and so, expect to approach that interview that way. Expect that HR portion. This is where doing your own intelligence gathering, knowing about the school, the fleet makeup, how big the student body is, if you will, how many instructors work there, um, kind of the ins and outs of how the operation works is great brownie points on the interview when they ask, "Well, tell me, what do you know about what we do here?" Um, have a good tell me about a time story. Expect that tell me about a time story to be based off of some kind of training experience. If you've come in with dual instruction given, Expect a question framed around, how would you address a student who dot dot dot. If you come in green CFI, you don't have any dual instruction given. Expect that question to be framed around. Tell me about a time maybe you struggled in training and what you did to overcome that. Really speak to prioritizing your student's logbook over your own. I'm not taking credit for this saying, but I haven't heard it yet, so I guess kind of I am. But your job as an instructor is to build pilots, not to build flight time. The flight time is going to come as you do your job as an instructor, but really find ways to speak to that during your interview process about how that student's logbook is the priority. Their training progression is the priority much more than your progression towards that regional or that 135 airline job.
And that'll probably even come faster for you by prioritizing your pilots. Because even if you do something, get them in a simulator more, that doesn't count towards you, but that will make their training faster. And then you'll probably move on to your next customer because you can get them
Exactly.
certificated and it helps keep them more motivated, and you're not going to deal, on a broad scale, probably with as many cancellations and things like that. They know, like, right? These are people too, like, right? When you go somewhere and you're expecting a service and they're the person providing that service just isn't into it that day. You're probably going to go somewhere else, or you're going to think twice before you go back to hire that, service provider for whatever it may be again. Right? These are not robots, they're people. They will know this.
Yep, absolutely. Um, and the last little bit is just expect that interviewer potentially to, as they're acting as a student pilot or whoever it is, to really tailor your teaching to the scenario that they give you. They should tell you where, hey, this is who I am as a student. This is where I'm at in training. This is a lesson I would like you to present. Really tailor that to that scenario and who they are as a student. Example I love to give is, when we look at the aerodynamics portion of the ACS for CFI, it's big, it's meaty, there's a lot of information there. Think about the scenario you're be given if you're teaching aerodynamics. If the scenario is, hey, I just did a discovery flight and I got paired with you, you're my instructor. Today's our first lesson. Teach me about why the airplane flies. Well, think about what you're going to include, what you're not going to include in that initial first lesson. Remember, this is just the first lesson of many more as they journey through their syllabus and that training progression. Is lesson number 1 the time and place to talk about dynamic and static stability? Maybe not. That'll come down the road.
Right, I'm having visions of someone putting the whole lift equation on a
Yes.
whiteboard and the poor student
Yes.
going like, "I have to do calculus every day when I show up."
Like, I was told math is a lot of pilots are bad at math, and this equation is making me reconsider.
Right. So yeah, understanding your audience that does come with skill and time, but yeah, you can definitely expect that even for a new instructor, I expect you to at least put in a good faith effort and not make
Yes.
a big old deep dive into the whole thing.
And that's the other part too, is just you're not being evaluated for teacher of the year, if you will. I know, or whoever's doing your interview, they know you're a new CFI. I'm not looking for perfection and teacher of the year. Is the items you're presenting, is the information correct? Is it in logical order? Does it make sense to be presented this way to the student I am and where I'm at in training in that scenario? So, like you said, a lot of that comes with practice and experience. But if you could really just try to get that CFI check ride out of your mind when you're actually doing that interview, of that it's not a check ride. It's an
Mhm.
interview and there's a definite difference.
Yeah, for sure. Let's get wrapped up here. We're coming towards the end of our content. So I like the top item you have here is that professionalism is a long-term investment.
Yeah, your reputation carries. We talked about it earlier, making connections. Aviation, it really is a small community. I think it's easy to lose sight of that for people that are working pilots or in training, is because it's very easy to just immerse and surround yourself with all these other pilots and aviation professionals, forgetting that it seems like a large community because everyone is into it, but on a macro level, it is a very small, tight knit community. And so your reputation carries. It's a long term investment. And these opportunities, we can use these slowdowns as opportunities to keep pushing yourself to the next level. Once you do leave, a new instructor is going to take your place. Keep raising the bar for them, especially if you work at a flight club or a flight school. The That professionalism permeates the culture there, and that culture is what's going to dictate how happy the employees are. And the happier employees, happier instructors lead to quicker training, efficient training, happier check ride and stage check results. And so putting in that investment now not only is setting you up for the next phase in your career, but it's also raising that bar and keeping the standard high for those that are going to inevitably take your place when you do move on.
I think that's a great way to sum it up. Thank you, Anthony, for taking the time to come on More Right Rudder today and sharing this information with us.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Thanks for having me. It was fun.
It was a lot of fun. We'll see ya.
Thanks.